Well, one of those testifying before the International Committee on Big Data, Privacy and Democracy at the House of Commons Ethics hearings is Roger McNamee. Once a proud pioneer investor in Facebook, he is now one of the company's most severe critics. And he's the author as well of the book, Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe. And Roger McNamee is with me in the studio. Good to see you.
Peter, it's great to be here.
Thanks for being here. What's your message for the hearings that you're about to attend into the roles and responsibilities of the social media platforms? And I'll get to Facebook, but beyond that, what do we need to know?
I think that all policymakers everywhere around the world need to understand that the problem you're dealing with here is not like any past regulatory issue we faced.
How come?
Because the economy has changed. Frankly, if you think about what Google has been able to do over the last 20 years, what Facebook's done over the last 15, is they've essentially converted data into the new oil. And as a consequence, they are recasting the economy in a way that none of us has really understood or been prepared for. And the challenge for policymakers is that as consumers, we love the services. The issue is that there are consequences to society in the form of undermining democracy, public health, privacy, and innovation, that the cost of which are just too high to bear. And as a consequence, we need to treat these companies a little bit the way we did chemical companies in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Recognize there's a cost that we have to
Do you think that there is a general awareness about the problems or concerns in the public? I get the sense that watching all of this, we have these hearings in Canada, we have hearings in the U.S., we have hearings in Great Britain. It almost seems to me that politicians or policymakers are leading a conversation that a lot of people in the world don't seem to either be having or care about.
One of the benefits of being on a book tour for the last 3.5 months is that I have met now tens of thousands of people on the book tour. And I can't tell you how giant the difference is from, say, 6 months ago. For the first 2 years of my campaign, it was really hard to get anybody to pay attention. And when I did, they really didn't understand what I was talking about. But now kids are having issues that their parents can see, that their teachers can see. And the issues in politics have certainly hit the radar of many people. Right. And as a consequence, when I go to, whether it's a bookstore or whether I'm at a conference, there is not only much more awareness, but there's actually a desire to do something about it. And I think part of the reason that politicians are reacting so strongly now is that the signal from the voters is getting to be meaningful enough. It's not like everybody's talking about it every day. It's not like they understand all the issues yet. But given how complicated and nuanced the issues are, I'm super impressed by how many people are engaging now and how interested they are in playing a role in getting to a good answer.
What's the transformation that you have seen in Facebook that is now causing you so much concern?
So when I first met Mark in 2006, he was 22 years old. Facebook was very primitive. What we now think of as the user experience of Newsfeed did not yet exist. It was only available to high school and college students, and there were a total of 9 million members. So it was tiny. And I was able to help Mark deal with a crisis in the business that caused me to become a mentor to him for the 3 years thereafter. And I was really optimistic. There was a cultural shift going on in Silicon Valley away from the traditional model of technology empowering users to something more cynical. And I thought Mark was separate from that. And candidly, I held that view far too long in retrospect. But what happened in 2016 was I started to notice things going on in the domain of civil rights and in politics that did not fit my very rosy view of the company. And I reached out to Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, both of whom I had mentored, both of whom were dear friends.
You said to them, look, I see some problems, guys, that you should get out ahead of.
I went to them with a draft of an opinion piece I'd written but had not published, which said that I feared that the business model and algorithms of Facebook were allowing bad actors to harm innocent people, and that they needed to get on top of it. This is prior to the U.S. election. So it wasn't like I was sitting there worried about the U.S. election yet. And once the election happened, it was very clear that the Russians may have used Facebook as part of their interference. And I felt like my friends needed to do what Johnson & Johnson did when Tylenol when that fellow poisoned bottles of Tylenol in Chicago in 1982, which is to say, leaped to the defense of the people who used the product. And for whatever reason, they weren't interested. And I spent 3 months pleading with them. And at the end of the 3 months, I realized that they just viewed this as a public relations problem, not as a business issue. And as a consequence, if I wanted to be helpful, I would have to go from being a staunch advocate of the company to being a critic, which was not a natural transition and very emotionally stressful. But it was one of those situations where I realized I'd been part of this, I'd profited. It was really important that I take a stand, that I do the right thing, that I become an activist. And I've spent the last now more than 2 years speaking out and trying to help people understand both the issues and the opportunities to make the world a better place.
So here we are. Government's trying to struggle with all of these, sometimes coincidental, sometimes conflicting notions of censorship and regulation. Have you come to believe there is one particular option governments now need to follow? Just what's the answer?
Yeah, Peter, I think there are two ways you have to think about the problem. You have to recognize that there are issues related to the ability of voters and consumers to make choices without fear. This is what we traditionally label as privacy. And that has to do with the business model of these companies, where they now do massive surveillance. They accumulate data every possible way, generally without the awareness or permission of the users whose data is taken. And so we think as consumers, hey, we give up a little personal data, we get a free service. In fact, what's going on is something much scarier than that. That the data we're giving up is less than 1% of what they have on us, and that what they're doing is they're using their data about us to create perfect information for marketers, while at the same time using the fact that we use their search engines to find stuff, to control the information available to us to match us up better with their customer, the marketer. So we have to solve that problem. Then the other problem we got to solve, which is the election problem. We've got to keep these guys from having this notion that controversy is more important than truth. And right now the business models are improved by hate speech, conspiracy theories, and disinformation, because they get to the true personality of each person, and they get them inflamed, and they get lots of activity on the site. And that's incredibly unhealthy. And I think you can solve both problems without censorship. I think you can solve both problems with the same solution, which is to end the business model of gathering all this data, creating these data voodoo dolls in every citizen, and then using that to manipulate people. I think once you get rid of the data from the system, if you get them back to the model we think they're on, which is we give them a little bit of data, they can target an ad to us, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's the data voodoo dolls that cause the problem.
All right, Roger McNamee, great to get your perspective. Good to talk to you.
Peter, what a pleasure to be here.